Beauty abounds in Guysborough, Nova Scotia. You should check it out. Come and visit.
Oh, yeah.
I think our leader, Trudeau, I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word.
Oh, hello. Do you have a warrant to be here?
Oh, yeah.
It's time for a change in this country, my friends. A real change.
Wiggle and squirm as you might, it is really hard to put lipstick on a pig.
When I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises.
WTF.
Here.
I know this place is where I am. No other place is better than. No matter where I go, I am proud to be Canadian. I am, you know I am. The wild step work.
The one we call Canadian.
Gentlemen, beam me aboard.
Honourable member from Leeds Grenville.
We've got a wild show to present tonight. Like, we're going off the rails. Randy's on the rails. Randy is on the ropes, guys. Like, we are going to show that. We're going to reveal everything about that. We've got a couple of committee videos to show at the end of this farce. The last couple of days in the House of Commons with Randy. It's been ridiculous, guys. Like, oh, watch this.
Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes, at the conclusion of asking his question, as he was sitting down, called the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development Cocaine Randy. That is extremely unparliamentary, and I ask you, Mr. Speaker, to ask him to withdraw that remark. Thank you very much.
Hey gang, what's up? Just Aaron right here, Canadian Looney. Things are going crazy in the House of Commons. Cocaine Randy, Bossino, Minister of Employment, alleged cocaine importer, other Randy, Indigenous Randy, queer Randy. Which one is it? He's running the Conservative gauntlet here. We're going to kick it off with Poilievre, nailing Boissonneau. Then we're going to see Barrett, Lanceman, Garnet Genu. They're all unleashing on Cocaine Randy. What a joke. Just come out and be honest. Just try it one time. Liberals, this lie can go no further. How many scandals are you going to allow around one minister? He's such a joke. Let's take a look. This is kind of fun. The state of Canadian federal politics is a mess. Randy Boissonneau, clean it up. Let's take a peek. And his stories are hard to believe. They're like lies that a 7-year-old would tell. Such a child, a man-child. What is it, a queer man-child? Is there such a thing? There would be, I guess, to these woke folk. I just see people as people for what they are. And I don't see Randy Boissonneau as much of a person. Minister of Employment, the gimp. Oh, and he's a blowhard too, guys. You hear about the coke deal, the coke they were running, he and Stephen Anderson? Sounds like, anyways, that's alleged, but it will come out.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, the employment minister first denied that he and his company were profiting off government business, and then text messages showed the contrary. They referred to a Randy. Well, he claimed that it was another Randy. We now know there is no other Randy. We know he falsely claimed he was Indigenous in order so that his company could steal resources that were meant for real Indigenous people. And now his company address matches the address of a place that was the location of 2 cocaine busts. Any one of these things would be a resigning offense. Why won't he resign now?
Order. The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, I know the person referred to in today's article. I've never met that person. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. Those are the facts.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Apparently the person he doesn't know is himself. He says that he's not the Randy in the text messages, but his own business associates say there is no other Randy. He says that he said that he was Indigenous in order that, and now, while his company has the same address as a place that has 2 cocaine busts, he says he doesn't know the person involved in that address either. Does this minister even know who he is?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, the article states...
And ask all members, please. There's the Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development from the top.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know the person referred to in the article today. I've never met her. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. The article states that fact, and that is the fact.
Let's take a look. Melissa Lanceman, Nayland Randy.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
It seems like every time the employment minister finds rock bottom, it keeps getting worse. First, he said he wasn't the Randy involved in his company, but we know there was only one Randy at his company. He said he wasn't involved with his company while in cabinet, and text messages reveal that he is. He said that he was Indigenous to profit from government contracts stealing from First Nations communities, and now there's new news of coordinating business activities with drug smugglers and convicts. This is the behavior of a low-life fraud, not a federal cabinet minister. Simple question. How does that guy still have his job?
Order. Order. The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, despite the innuendo, here are the facts. I don't know the person in question. I never met that person in question. And Mr. Speaker, those are simply the facts. The article even says that I've never met the person in question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Speaker, here are the facts. He flaunts the ethics rules. He claims a false identity. He gets caught in a web of lies. That's what the Prime Minister rewards after 9 years. With each passing day, we find out more about the employment minister's scams and schemes, and we learn that he's just a phony and a fraud. Canadians want to know. Indigenous communities who stole from him, who he stole from, want to know, and Liberal backbenchers want to know when the Prime Minister is going to fire that cabinet minister.
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know the person in the article from today. I've never met the person in the article from today. Those are the facts. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives may not like it, but it's actually in the article that I don't know the person in question. Never met them.
MP Michael Barrett hammers Cocaine Randy. Let's take a peek.
Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The Liberal minister from Alberta is a fake and a fraud. He said he was not the Randy involved in his company, but we know that there's only one Randy. He said he wasn't involved in his company at the cabinet table. I'm going to ask colleagues
today we've been skating close to the line in terms. Excuse me, colleagues. I will start my comment again if you would give me the privilege of listening. At several occasions today, we've been skating close to the line in terms of what's acceptable language. The honourable member from Leeds-Grenville, I think, has skated over that line and accusing a direct member. Can I ask the honourable member to withdraw that comment and start his question from the top, please?
Restart, Speaker, that this Liberal minister from Alberta has been implicated in fraud and media reports. Today, we've seen that. It's very clear.
I'm just going to, I'm not certain if I was having trouble hearing the member. I don't think I heard the withdraw. If he could withdraw and start again, I'd appreciate it. If members were not to take the floor while a member is being recognized, the Speaker will be able to hear the member. The honourable member from Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Withdrawing the previous words, Speaker, will talk about this Liberal minister from Alberta who has been implicated in media reports in fraud. Some of them he's even apologized for. He misrepresented his identity, claiming to be Indigenous, trying to steal contracts from people who are in fact Indigenous. This same minister said that he wasn't the Randy at his own company. We know that there was only one Randy at that company. It's pandemic profiteering. We know that there's allegations of fraud. Why is it that this Prime Minister just won't fire that minister?
The honourable minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, what the member opposite just said is simply not true.
The honourable member from Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
It's unbelievable that with the cocaine connections to the Liberal minister from Alberta, that those Liberals, that Prime Minister, want to allow him to continue to be in cabinet. He said that he was Indigenous to try and steal contracts from individuals who are Indigenous. That's okay as long as you are a Liberal. The company is involved in more than half a dozen lawsuits because of fraud, and that's okay as long as you're a Liberal. They came before committee and said things that we now know weren't true, like it must have been some other Randy. If he won't resign, why won't this Prime Minister fire that fraudster?
Again.
Nah, we're not going to listen to Greg Fergus for another... Well, we'll listen to more Greg Fergus. But that was all yesterday news. We have today's too. Like, it's so hard to believe when you start unraveling this ball of wool. Like, you guys watch most of the things that I show. Like, and this one gets so much darker. Today, things were totally out of hand from the very get-go. Andrew Scheer opens it up, and after that, Greg Fergus loses composure and control of the entire rest of the meeting. It was delayed by, I don't know, like 25 minutes. Because he doesn't have the balls to stand up to his own corruption. Like, he would just say, questions aren't going to be asked. But he doesn't have the coots or the gall to do that. He doesn't have the evil. Like, he's just a dumb guy doing what he's told, kind of. Doesn't really understand. Like, I'd like to think that. He's probably just evil. Anyways, guys, this is how it went down.
The honourable member from Regina Cpac.
Yesterday brings
these new sordid details about the employment minister's scandal. And yesterday we learned that his company shares a mailing address with an international drug trafficker who's been busted for cocaine not once, but twice. He's been caught out in falsehoods, caught faking Indigenous identity to try to secure government contracts meant for real Indigenous people, and his company is under investigation for 9 fraud-related counts. Why on earth has the Prime Minister not fired this man?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, I don't know the person referred to in that article. I've never met that person. It's stated in the article, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
Let's recap the scandal so far. He said he was Indigenous, even though he wasn't. He said his great-grandmother was Cree, even though she wasn't. He said there was another Randy working at the company, even though there wasn't, that he had nothing to do with the company while he was in cabinet, even though he was, and his company got a contract while he was sitting around the cabinet table. In a normal government, any one of those scandals would be cause for dismissal.
Yeah, that's right.
So why in this wacko Liberal government does this man still sit in cabinet?
And ask members to be very judicious in their use of words.
Everybody be judicious in the words they use, like to not offend Greg Fergus.
Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Send
the Minister has
in the
already answered this question many times. The question that we still haven't had an answer for is why the Conservative leader's scandal, who refuses to seek his security clearance and protect himself and his future members during the next election, what is he hiding? When he refuses to get information about the risks of foreign interference for the upcoming elections. Thank you. I would ask the honourable member to not speak until the chair recognizes him.
Sorry, like this episode isn't just about the gong show that is Randy. It is the nut house that is Greg Fergus. Like, they're screwing with question period. Like, they're trying to make it so it's not even watchable by having this butt plug, rainbow butt plug, whatever he is, frog mouth. What's up with his? Again, I know I'm not perfect, guys, on here. Like, I know that, obviously, but Greg Fergus, there's something really gross about him. Weird, he's got like frog lips. Like, ever notice? Watch.
Well, we don't know what it'll take for this guy to get fired from this Prime Minister. We do know what will get you fired. Remember Jody Wilson-Raybould?
Yeah.
She was fired for telling the truth about the Prime Minister's attempts to interfere in a criminal case. Here's what she had to say. A Prime Minister committed to true reconciliation would have removed this minister and the other Randy from cabinet long ago. Instead, we get to watch white people play Ancestry Wheel of Fortune. Ouch. How come under this Prime Minister, a strong Indigenous woman gets fired for telling the truth when a weak, fake Indigenous man gets to keep his job after lying?
Again, colleagues.
I'm going to ask the honourable member from Regina Capel, who once sat in this chair, to withdraw that one word which was directly used to another member, which would not be considered parliamentary, and ask the honourable member to do so.
I'll withdraw the word lying and replace it with telling falsehoods.
You're begging for it.
The actual word.
I expect you to say something kind.
the word which was being used. I'm going to ask the honourable member to withdraw the word fake, please.
Please change what you say.
Just for the speaker to clarify, the word fake, but the minister did.
He faked all those things.
The minister is now admitting that he's not Indigenous, so he needs to be something that he wants.
Colleagues,
what's happening?
Only one solution. There's only one solution.
Colleagues, yesterday there were members who were asked to withdraw that very same word, and the member did. And so I'm going to ask the honourable member if he could please do so.
I will withdraw the word fake and replace it with either sham, imitation, counterfeit.
The honourable member. Colleagues, I've always insisted, I'm going to ask all members please not to take the floor while the speaker is addressing Parliament. When it has been a tradition of this place to ask very tough questions, to keep government accountable. It's important for government, of course, to provide very clear answers. But we try to do this in a way that allows people to treat each other with decorum and respect. And so the honourable member has sat in this chair in this position once before. Yesterday we asked a number of members to, when it was referring to a particular member, to withdraw that same word that I'm just asking for today. I just asked the honourable member just to withdraw that word so we could just move on.
Mr. Speaker, when I sat in that chair, I heard the word fake being used many, many times.
I will come back to this issue later on. I will come back to this issue.
Fergus backs down. Fergus takes a couple steps back from Andrew Scheer. Interesting.
The other question period. We're the honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I think that little display of disrespect for that place is ubiquitous of how Conservative members treat this place. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, they are trying to distract and make a mockery.
Colleagues. I'm going to ask the honourable member, the honourable members need I'm going to ask the honourable member from Lanark, Hastings, Addington to please. Sorry, forgive me. Lanark, Frontenac. Forgive me, the honourable member from Lanark, Frontenac and Kingston to please not take the floor when he is not recognized to do so. Now, colleagues,
so I don't know what he does there, how long this is going to last. He pauses them for like 15 seconds. Guys, Aaron, Canadian Looney, like, subscribe, share.
I do not know if the Honourable Minister had finished her answer because I was not able to hear her. So I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister.
We all know by now there's one Randy, and he's as corrupt as any official could possibly be, like, that is half organized in any way, shape, or form. I know a whole bunch of things, but this guy Randy, all the liberals keep sticking up for him. You'll remember that, right? Like, that everybody was like, oh no, we never needed to look into who the other Randy was or answer the very plausible questions that Canadians had about this scandal. Like, they all stood up and said, no, don't worry. Don't think about a thing. You've got dental care, health care. Try to access that stuff. They're all rebates, right? Like, you've got to spend a ludicrous amount to get any back. They're not tax cuts. And we know this stuff. Oh, it burned me, though.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister to start from the top.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this shameful display of disrespect from the Conservative members of Parliament for this place is on display today, and it is exactly how they have been operating for the past couple of weeks. Mr. Speaker, it is time for them to stop filibustering.
Melanie Joly is falling asleep. She's so coked out. She's falling asleep. Back that up. Back it up 20 seconds. Watch Melanie Joly right over
this shameful
her
display
shoulder.
of disrespect from the Conservative members of Parliament for this place is on display today, and it is exactly how they have been operating for the past couple of weeks. Mr. Speaker, it is time for them to stop filibustering and obstructing the work of Parliament. It is time for them to start respecting this place, respecting the work we do here on behalf of Canadians. We have deposited up to 29,000 pages worth of documents. They need to stop these games and let everybody get back to work on behalf of Canadians. Thank you.
She woke up.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from St. Margaret, South Shore, to please
shut up,
not take the floor. And to all colleagues, we are wasting a fair bit of time. And to making sure that members get going, we might have to cut a couple of questions from today. So let us make sure that we follow up very carefully and we listen to the instructions. The
Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. What time is it for? It's time for the Minister to fire the Minister of...
Again, like, I'm a Berthold fan, but he's always en français. Je m'appelle Aaron, je comprends français peu. Like, I get enough of what they're saying in French, but I don't like the French. But Berthold has a good argument here, so we're going to listen to the French.
Official languages. He says he's an Indigenous person, even though he's not. He claims his great-grandmother is Cree, and that's false. He's not the Randy from the texts who runs GHI, but we now know that there's only one Randy in the company. Worse still, the company in which he's a shareholder received government contracts while he was in cabinet. The Minister of Official Languages must do the only honourable thing, resign in shame. Will the Prime Minister fire his imposter of a minister? The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has answered this question. He has said what he said at committee, and this is absolutely false, what they're saying. The Conservatives need to stop these partisan and political games. They don't lead us anywhere. They need to respect this place and allow it to.
So Karina Gould, the ghoul right there, is telling, she's not just talking to the Conservatives, guys. She's talking to Canada. She's saying we need to respect this place more. And despite the crimes that are committed by our ministers in this place, we can't accuse them of the crimes because it's not parliamentary. What kind of joke is that? Like, you can't question the disorder? Like, again, Karina Gould, I guess, probably looks all right there, but she is a hideous human being. She's the lowest life form there is. She would do anything
to work
to walk
and to make sure we can all do the work that Canadians have sent us here for. I would ask everyone once again to be very judicious in the choice of the words they use. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Official Languages is not only an imposter.
Mr. Speaker, Manitoba families are paying more and getting less at grocery.
Why is he still in Canada?
Members of very much in
are derailing the House and detract all members during the next election.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
If the minister doesn't know where to find these individuals, perhaps he can ask the other Randy, who's still very much in contact with those partners. But even the Liberals are taking note of this humiliating and fraudulent affair. Liberals like Jody Wilson-Raybould, who called it, quote, so shameful and extremely destructive. The Prime Minister fires the first Indigenous Attorney General, but keeps the first fake Indigenous Employment Minister. That's some version of reconciliation. When is the Prime Minister going to fire the Employment Minister and the other Randy?
Say she's not woken up.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the minister has addressed those issues. He has stated that what the member opposite said is false. But, Mr. Speaker, what we want to know is why is the Leader of the Opposition silencing his members of Parliament? Why won't he allow his members of Parliament to speak on behalf of their constituents and advocate for their communities? Mr. Speaker, all we hear from the Leader of the Opposition is silencing his own members of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. Why won't he just let them speak? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Employment is embroiled in allegations of fraud. He almost certainly violated the Conflict of Interest Act. He got caught pretending to be Indigenous in an effort to steal government contracts from legitimately owned Indigenous businesses. And we now learn that the minister has a business connection to a cocaine trafficker. In the face of all of that, why is he still in Cabinet?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. The member has once again combined all sorts of falsehoods to make some sense of the story, but the minister has answered these questions on several opportunities.
The Prime Minister violated the
from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, one must ask why the Prime Minister hasn't seen fit to fire this minister. Could it be that the Prime Minister violated the Conflict of Interest Act not once, but twice? Could it be that the Prime Minister is a cultural appropriator, having worn blackface more times than he can remember? Isn't it the case that if the Prime Minister were to fire the minister, he'd have to fire himself?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, what Canadians are witnessing today is very disturbing, Mr. Speaker. On many occasions, you had questions that were...
Get ready for some lies, guys. Like, look at this little yapper. He's got his pie hole all the way open. He's going to lie to you full blown. En anglais. I don't mean to talk about the French and English, but I got to be honest, like, you know, there aren't that many francophones left. And if you can speak English and you think you're a francophone, you're not. You're bilingual.
Ask an answer that was provided, Mr. Speaker. But the real issue that Canadians are asking at home is why the leader of the Conservative would not get the security clearance, would not get the briefing, and would not do his job, Mr. Speaker. That's what Canadians are concerned about. Get the clearance, get the briefing, and do your job, man.
I invite all members to ensure that they ask their questions to the Speaker. The Honourable, that they speak to the Speaker, whether or not they ask questions or give answers. The
Honourable Member for Charles-Bourg-Saint-Charles.
Nope.
The Minister of Official Languages said he was indigenous, so he...
Again, another piece of en français, but like Pierre Paul Hoos here has a good point, and it's in French, but the translation's not bad.
He can get money for Indigenous companies, even though he's not. Must also, the famous Randy, he says isn't him, even though we know there's only one Randy there. He's an imposter and a charlatan. He's corrupt.
Look at that. Good, right?
On several occasions, I have asked all members to be very cautious in terms of the language that they are using. This time, the language that is being used directly impugns another member of this place, and I would ask the honourable member for Charles-Bourg-Saint-Charles to ask his question again and to retract his comments and to re-ask his question. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Official Languages has said he's Indigenous. I would ask you to remove your comments first, retract them, and then start your question again. The Honourable Member for I'd like to retract that he's a fraudster and corrupt, and I will say instead that he has committed fraud and corruption. Is that okay?
It's funny.
No.
No.
That won't work.
You can't say that.
I would ask members to follow the members of other who asked the question yesterday, and their retraction was acceptable. So I'd ask the member once again, please, to retract his comments and then ask his question again. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. We can't say the minister is a fraudster and corrupt. Instead, there are allegations of fraud and corruption with respect to this minister. And I would ask the Prime Minister to remove him from Cabinet. The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Our colleague from Charles-Bourg-Saint-Charles is obviously just having a hard time expressing himself today. But one thing we do agree on is that the whole story of his Conservative leader, who saying that the agreement we have with the government of Cpac is to build 8,000 housing units, but he said there are none, but there are dozens in his own riding. So these units are being built. So when will he ask his Conservative leader to go himself and see that there are truly projects in his riding? The Honourable Member for Charles-Bourg-Saint-Charles. The minister is trying to divert from the question, but the minister...
Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Vita Lakes.
To get government contracts, the Liberal minister from Edmonton said that he was Indigenous, but he's not. He said that he wasn't the Randy who was involved in the ongoing operations of the company that was applying for government contracts, but text messages show that he was. Now, he also said he wasn't directing his company from the cabinet table, but we know that that's also not true. Not true, not true, and not true. So we don't know which minister they're going to stand up, but what we want to know from that minister is, do they think that that behavior is appropriate, and do they think that he should remain in cabinet?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister has already responded to those questions. But what I find really interesting is that today marks 1,000 days since Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. And we have not heard a single question about this from the Conservative members of Parliament. This is unsurprising for them, given the fact that when it comes to their support for Ukraine, it has been wavering over the past year. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we stand for Ukraine. Do the Conservative members of Parliament?
Exactly. Question.
It's hard to watch.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, I'm glad that the minister showed up for work, but she must have been late enough to not hear our statement where we expressed, of course, our support for Ukraine. But let's focus on the facts. The facts are that their cabinet colleague is involved with cocaine traffickers. Their cabinet colleague is pretending to be Indigenous in order to disenfranchise Indigenous-owned companies and Indigenous people. That's who they're in league with. That minister can't seem to tell the truth to save his own life. So Randy or other Randy or pretend Indigenous Randy, none of them should be in cabinet. Why won't they fire this fraudster?
Michael Barrett's ripping it up. Just so you know, my name's Aaron, Canadian Looney. It's a busy evening. I'm not even on the keyboard tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. Welcome, everyone. This one is a busy one for the show. We've got to show Canadians what is actually happening, because, like, if they don't see, they don't know that the Liberals kind of did lose control of the House today. Like, Greg Fergus cannot deny that Canadians want answers to these questions, that it would only make sense then if a guy like Randy says, like, no, there's another Randy, and it's your taxpayer dollars, you get to ask or find out who's the other Randy. Right? Like, what kind of bizarro hidden world do they think they live in? There is some accountability to this stuff, right? Like, hopefully, they've been ripping us off for a while, but the people that I think that watched here, like, again, are looking for accountability, or to be like, where did the money go? WTF, guys, where are the funds? Like, they just keeps... Anyways, the rest of this is kind of funny and droll.
Again,
Greg Fergus is such
for the second day in a row, I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville to, on the very last part of his question, using language which just can't pass in this place. The Honourable Member, will he just simply withdraw that question? And then we can move on. Withdraw that word, and then we could just simply move on.
The word fraudster is withdrawn.
I thank the Honourable Member. The Honourable Leader of the Government of the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess the member opposite wasn't paying attention to my answer, because I said we were halfway through question period, and I had yet to hear a question from the members opposite about the war of aggression by Russia on Ukraine. And Mr. Speaker, let's look at the facts.
The big reason would be for that, Karina, is that Canadians don't give a shit about that war. It's a tax fraud, money grab, hijinks of, like, immoral proportions. And most of us know that, like, you're funneling money in. They don't even have soldiers anymore. All those old men, the guys older than I am. I'm in my mid-40s. Like, they sent old men to die in that war. And she's acting like we owe something to whatever platform, stage, false agenda, some lie. Again, they don't like me much here on YouTube, like, for telling it kind of as I see it. But I do see what they're doing, and I'd rather let, like, my next door neighbor know, like, they're kind of hosing us. If you pay attention, if you want to know, like, again, if you don't want to know, what are you doing here? But if you want to know, check me or one of the other indies out on these sites, and you'll find out. It won't take long. Like,
This time last year, they were holding up and voting against the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, an agreement that Ukraine had asked us for as an ally. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to meaningful action, they do everything they can to hold back support from Ukraine, and we're seeing that today too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And ask the honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot, please, to not take the floor when not recognized by the chair. The honourable member from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Peterborough. Brock.
Speaker, reports continue to reveal one false statement after another about the employment minister's claim of Indigenous heritage. The fact he is still in cabinet has laid bare the reality that truth and reconciliation mean nothing to Liberals. We found out today the company co-owned by the minister, GHI, is in fact green-lit to bid on government contracts. Wow. This is the same company that falsely claimed to be wholly Indigenous owned while inventing this fictional other Randy and sharing a mailbox with an alleged cocaine smuggler. Will the Prime Minister just end this charade and fire the minister?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It only seems apparent that the Conservatives want to talk about reconciliation when it's allegation, but rather they don't want to talk about reconciliation when we're talking about investing in First Nations housing or helping Indigenous people ensure their opportunities to have economic success or procure from the government of Canada. They don't want to talk about that, Mr. Speaker, because you know why? Their record is shameful, Mr. Speaker. In fact, they have continually cut services for Indigenous people. When they were in power, we will do the opposite.
When you get really desperate, I guess you'd send in a waste of everything, like Patty Hajdu. She was Minister of Health. Now she's Indigenous Services, maybe Northern Affairs, but I think it's Indigenous Services. And ask the Indigenous how that has been going for them. They're all, every single Liberal minister and MP is worse than the last one until the next one. And then you see the next one and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe how bad this person is. Like, they're not human. Like, again, look just next to Patty Hajdu down there on the screen. Like, we've got Mark Miller, Ryan Garrettson. Up there, we've got House Feather. We've got James Filoni, like, piece of shit Maloney. Jessica Atwin is up there. I guess that looks like Rachel Bandine. We've got this pedo, like, up here in the front, in front of Patty Hajdu. That's Duclos Procurement Services. Every one of these guys is worse than the last one until you see the next one. They're just not real people. Like, and again, I'm not on here to spread hate. I'm on here to, like, let people know that there is hate out there and we've got to defend ourselves against that, because we care about each other, right? Like, I do about you guys. Like, oh, we can't see this now. I've got to pull myself up. But this is Bubbles' sister right here. what's her name? Look at Bubble's sister right down here. The worst of the worst. I think she's a minister of special needs or like Olympics or something. Like, these liberals honestly screwed me up. Like, we're going to leave from this now into a couple of really interesting committee videos that took place today. We're going into the OGO. That is what we're going to do. Come on.
Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 153, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. The mighty OGO, truly the only committee that matters. Before we start, everyone, please, just a reminder to keep your headphones away from your microphone so we can protect the hearing of our very valued interpreters who are working hard with us today. We'll start off. Welcome, Minister Haju. Welcome back to OGO. It's been a few years since we've had you here. I assume you'll have an opening statement for us?
I do. Thank you very much, Mr.
The floor is
Chair.
yours.
And appreciate the invitation to come to GoGo. I think this is an important conversation about how we can focus our energies as a government and as in a country on growing Indigenous economy opportunities. And of course, today we're here to talk about the procurement strategy for Indigenous businesses. Investing in Indigenous communities and building up Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs benefits all Canadians. According to the 2022 National Indigenous Economic Strategy for Canada, the continued exclusion of Indigenous peoples costs the Canadian economy about $27.7 billion every year. The National Indigenous Economic Development Board found that closing the existing employment gap could help lift over 150,000 Indigenous people out of poverty. Since 2015, we've been focused on strengthening self-determination and building capacity so Indigenous people and businesses have the tools and resources to fully participate in the economy on their own terms. For example, the government increased education funding by 80%, helping more kids access high-quality education right at home. Over the last decade, BDC found that expanded access to education has led to a 49% increase in the number of Indigenous people aged 25 to 64 in full-time employment. That's right, a full 49% increase. The Indigenous economy has the potential to grow from $32 billion to $100 billion in the next 5 years. And leaders like Tabitha Bull from the CCIB have been clear that procurement is a key part of hitting that target. Since the 5% minimum target was implemented, the value of contracts going to Indigenous businesses increased by $1.5 billion. I've been the minister responsible for this file since 2021. Our government has been engaging with Indigenous partners from across the country for years. In particular, I'd like to highlight the ways that the department has engaged with Indigenous partners to improve procurement procedures. We are transforming the procurement strategy with Indigenous partners. We are all
This is going to be a long drag with Patty Hadu. Like, we do get some good witnesses, or pardon me, questioners for Patty Hadu, but instead of that, I'm going to try this. See if I can do this.
To feel down, I said, young man, pick yourself off the ground. I said, young man, 'cause you're in a new town. There's no need to be unhappy. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. They have everything for young men to enjoy.
that's all we can do with that. I forget where we were at. Right here. Patty Hajdu lying her tail off to Canadians. Like, again, we need to have some hope. Maybe that is a glimmer of hope. I don't vest all of my hopes on what happened in an American election when I live in this country. I'd love to see an election date in Canada. That would make me feel really more comfortable. I did get to vote in our provincial election here the other day, but it was a complicated process. Like, and I'm good at this stuff, but like, I was trying to think, like, what would it be like if I didn't understand this? I think it would be complicated because you need to sit down, give your IDs, whatever. Then they give you a mail slip, which you need to like put the right code on the screen. So you need to, maybe you don't have that on your phone. You need the right scanner. Just saying, like, it wouldn't be a big surprise to me if they actually did steal that election in British Columbia a couple of weeks ago. I kind of think they did. Like, again, my perspective is skewed. Most people that watch my stuff and that I chat with are people that want change. So that would subjectify your opinion. But there was a lot of people saying, like, I can't wait. There's going to be change. I've got friends that are, lack of better words, like, times have changed, but used to be like progressive voters that maybe still would vote progressive, but they told me, like, I'm voting blue. We need change. EB still got in. Really, really weird. And then these big scandalous stories come out 2 days later. But his connections with that republic. Oh, Lord.
Focused on improving policies, safeguards, and processes. They have told us what will work and what does not, and we are listening. We're also actively working with partners on how best to transfer the role of defining and verifying Indigenous businesses to Indigenous peoples. Transferring the definition and the registration of Indigenous businesses from the government to Indigenous peoples will help us reach the ultimate goal of increased Indigenous economic activity. Parliamentarians need to work together, including through studies just like this one, to identify the existing barriers to economic reconciliation and new ways to break them down. Programs like PSIB are getting us closer to a Canada that maximizes its true economic potential. PSIB is opening doors for Indigenous participation, and historically those doors have been intentionally closed. Laws like the Indian Act systemically excluded Indigenous people to the point of being legislated out of the economy, as described by many Indigenous leaders. Members of the committee,
How
I thank you for the
self-righteous
opportunity
is
to
Patty
reinforce
Hajdu?
the federal government's
Like,
commitment to building.
She is disgusting. Gina was gonna light her up. Hopefully, I haven't seen this one yet. Like, I just knew that it was happening.
He's a cabinet colleague of yours. You work together closely, I would presume. I ask if you think he should stay in cabinet, and you're declining to answer that. Do you endorse his conduct as minister? What do you think of what he has done?
I can tell you that GHI, the business that Mr. Boissonneau was co-owner of, was never been on the IUD.
Boissonneau, go to hell.
Okay, I think you're saying a lot by not saying a lot, Minister, so I'll move on to my next question. Is Global Health Imports still eligible to receive government contracts?
I believe they are, but they are, as I said, not part of the Indigenous Business Directory. I can't answer in affirmative.
They represented themselves as Indigenous owned. They did so falsely. They are still eligible to receive government contracts. Do you think there should be penalties for companies that misrepresent their Indigenous identity? Should they be prevented from bidding further on government contracts?
In fact, there are penalties for fraudulent behavior, and I would hope that anybody that is procuring on behalf of the Government of Canada is careful about which businesses they procure from to make sure that proper business practices are followed. And certainly the Government of Canada has measures that it can take if it's found that businesses have acted fraudulently and should.
Okay. You mentioned there are consequences for fraudulent activity, which I hope would include misrepresentations around Indigenous identity. Did Global Health Imports, in your view as the Indigenous Services Minister, engage in fraudulent activity?
I can't make that determination, but I can tell you that the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance with PSPC can take steps such as banning a business from future...
Sorry, I'll just jump in because I know there are options available, but okay, you don't want to rule specifically on the case of Global Health Imports. Let's take a hypothetical case where you have a company involved in health imports, let's say, that's owned by two people. Hypothetically, one of them happens to be a minister of the Crown, and they are bidding on government contracts and in the process claim to be an Indigenous-owned company. That claim turns out to be completely false. If that hypothetical company, in the process of pursuing government contracts, falsely claimed to be Indigenous-owned, would that be considered fraudulent activity?
It could possibly be, but that would be a decision by the Office of the Supplier Integrity and Compliance. I don't run that particular organization, so I would say that from my perspective, when there's allegations of fraud, it's very serious. And I think departments have a responsibility to ensure that they're procuring from companies that are not fraudulent. So
right, but so just definitionally, right? Like it would seem that the definition of fraud is misrepresenting the facts in some way in order to achieve a commercial advantage. Right? Pretending something is true when it's not in order to achieve a commercial advantage. So you have a company that pretended to be Indigenous owned when it wasn't Indigenous owned. The purpose of that pretense was clearly to increase its chances of getting government contracts that it wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Is that fraud?
What I would say is I think we're saying the same thing, that the process of ensuring that people claiming indigeneity should be with integrity, because what we want is we want Indigenous economic success. So I think we agree. And I think that any time that there's fraud in terms of allegations of identity, that is a very serious infraction. Now, what happens next is up to places like the Office of Supplier Integrity, but I can tell you that we, on our side, in Indigenous Services Canada, take integrity around indigeneity seriously. Although it is challenging.
And let me jump in here. I would hope the Prime Minister would take that integrity seriously and fire this minister from cabinet. Just in the time that I have left, Minister, are there any other companies owned by Liberal cabinet ministers or MPs, former MPs, or Liberal appointed senators that are on the Indigenous business list?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but we can commit to checking that out for you and getting the information back.
Okay, thank you. I think the committee would agree that we're interested in receiving that in the usual timeline, a list, the names of any companies on the Indigenous business list that are owned by Liberal MPs, cabinet ministers, appointed senators, or former MPs.
Thank you very much. Mr. Batiste, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Patty, for joining us, Minister. You know, there's a lot of, we heard from Joanna Bernard, the Regional Chief of New Brunswick, there's a lot of complexities involved in Indigenous identity. She had mentioned, you know, the challenges around the second generation cutoff where if you have children outside of people registered under the Indian Act for 2 successive generations, that you lose your status as an Indian. And so there's a definite cutoff point for First Nations or status Indians in Canada. However, when we're talking about Inuit, when we're talking about Métis, there isn't that definition in place that we can look to. In fact, the Supreme Court of Canada said in the Daniels case that there was no consensus definition for what it is to be Métis, nor need there be. During the study of C-53, we heard, there was a lot of people who believe that if you have Indigenous and European ancestry, that you're a Métis. But we know that, that's not the recognized definition from the Métis National Council. And so I'm wondering if, when we're looking at this, and we're looking at Indigenous identity and the overall job of government to try to figure out who should be eligible and who shouldn't be eligible, do we have help from any organizations that can help guide government? Because, it's pretty clear in UNDRIP, which is law, under Article 33, that nations want the ability to determine who their own citizens are, and that's part of the work why we're working with AFN on the second generation cutoff. I'm wondering if you can speak to, first, what kind of outside help are we getting from Indigenous organizations to help clarify these very muddy waters when it comes to people thinking they might be Indigenous? The committee do not want
there is an go.
Thank you.
Have a cleanup, Saskatchewan, in a group with
set up been no
and who their membership is.
Yeah. I think the study,
this is how it works. And we know that Indigenous people who are trying to fight these issues often have no choice but to go to the federal government to try to get support. And often the federal government says, I don't want to touch this because they don't want to be part of the identity process, but they are also still holding the reins. So my concern is that until that is done, it makes all of these other systems continue to falter. And what that does is it pits Indigenous people against Indigenous people, which is not very helpful. But it also means that the fraudulent claims are blocking Indigenous businesses that are legit from finding those opportunities because other people are using people or putting forward things that are not true. So I do want to say that I think it is incredibly important that be stepped out of, because until it's gone, until Indigenous communities and Indigenous processes are in place, we're going to continue to see these things. So I'm just wondering, Minister, you talked about the fact that it is fraudulent to pretend that you're of Indigenous identity, and you talked about penalties. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, and if there's something that's actually done to make people accountable? We're seeing more and more people pretending that they are of Indigenous identity, which I think is very interesting and very concerning, and actually in a lot of ways pretty easy in terms of Indigenous communities to identify. So I'm just wondering, what are the penalties, and how do you work with the Indigenous communities that have had people claim they belong to them that don't? How do you support them as well?
This skank, Rachel Blaney, is only looking to find out how she can, sign up for Indigenous status. She's looking for the easy way. I just want that status.
Well, thanks. And I think, so that's the flip side is that Indigenous communities often feel threatened by new people coming to community who sometimes claim connection to community, sometimes through issues of second generation cutoff, quite frankly. And that's why the study is so important, because in fact, some chiefs have said that people appear to claim membership, and in fact, they don't, as leaders of the community, recognize their lineage or their connection. And I think, you're also right that all of this
I apologize, Minister. That is our time. We're going to go to Mrs. Block for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all of you joining us here today. Minister, we have heard repeatedly from Indigenous groups that the majority of the money that the government claims is going to Indigenous companies is actually going to shell companies and not Indigenous companies. And we've just read recently in the news a great example of this with the company owned by Randy Boissonneau. And even though GHI was not listed on the Indigenous Business Directory, and you made mention of that, I think your departmental officials know differently and have agreed that they are still eligible to receive funding from ISC. We've also heard that there are little to no consequences for companies who pretend to be Indigenous. And I want to quote Shannon Mehta-Tawabin, CEO of the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association. And they would have stated that there are very little penalties and that there need to be penalties for sure. And he actually went on to say it's criminal behavior to conduct fraud. So we have to take other steps and demonstrate to the world and to Canada that those actors who are engaging in this activity don't use this window and this program to access the federal government in a bad way. Do you agree that it's criminal behavior and that there should be penalties?
First of all, what I would say is I think we're saying the same thing in that Indigenous business procurement is a really critical aspect of Canada's economic growth, and we have to take
Minister,
it seriously. And
I asked a very direct question.
And I'm going to give you a very direct answer.
Then I would ask you to get to that answer, please.
Great. And as I was saying, and that's why it's so important that we ensure that there isn't fraud in the space of claiming indigeneity. Now, as you know, Indigenous Services Canada...
Minister, my question was, do you believe it's criminal behavior when a non-Indigenous company claims to be Indigenous to steal money from Indigenous-owned companies through the set-aside?
What I would say is that fraud is fraud, and we do have an office that can look into claims of fraudulent behavior and apply a variety of penalties. And so I can't specifically give a general sweeping statement because, of course, different companies have different circumstances. But I would expect that anyone who's contracting through the federal government ensure that the laws of the land are upheld, including ensuring that fraud is not rewarded.
Thank you. Thank you. So Randy Boissonneau is a cabinet minister in the government of Canada. He's your colleague. He falsely claimed to be Indigenous in order to steal money set aside for Indigenous-owned businesses. As the Minister of Indigenous Services, will you commit to holding your colleague to account for running a company that falsely claimed to be Indigenous?
Well, as you know, first of all, I just want to reiterate that any false claims of indigeneity hurts the goal that I think you're obviously in favor of, which is increasing Indigenous economic activity in this country. And so I would say that
as the Minister of Indigenous Services, what will you do to hold your cabinet colleague to account for trying to defraud the government of Canada by claiming to be an Indigenous-owned business when they weren't?
I think I've been clear that Mr. Boissonneau's company has never been on the list.
That's not the question I'm asking. His actions speak for themselves. He claimed to be Indigenous. He claimed to be running an Indigenous business in order to access the set-aside that was meant for Indigenous-owned businesses. Will you join other members of Parliament in calling for his resignation? This file falls directly under your authority. And if you can go back to the Indigenous communities in your riding and tell them that he should not be held to account, that what he does was just fine, I think they will have something to say about that. You are the Minister of Indigenous Services. You have ministerial accountability. And when you know for fact that one of your colleagues has defrauded or attempted to defraud the government of Canada by claiming to be an Indigenous-owned business for the sole purpose of accessing something that they shouldn't have access to, I think you have a duty to call that member to account, especially when it falls under your jurisdiction as a minister.
Well, I'm really excited that we're talking about my riding, but obviously
interrupt.
my
That
time
is our
is up, so I
time.
won't get to
But
share with you about
we are going to
my
Miss Atwin. I'm
incredible
sure you
riding.
might be able to give a response during her time. There, I just took away your time for you. Go ahead, Miss Atwin, for 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and always good to see you in Committee Minister as well as our important officials. Would you like to speak about your wonderful riding and answer that question?
Just for a few moments, in the current iteration of my riding, there are 12 First Nations in my riding, and in the new riding setup, I'll have another 7 First Nations in Northern Ontario. And so I rely on.
Come on. So there she goes. Like, now Patty Heidi was going to say, like, oh, they restructured my riding. Anything they can do, any lie they can tell, they think it makes them look better. Just sometimes say, like, no, I'm kind of a bum. Like, I'm a bum politician, just like the other bum politicians up here on Parliament Hill. But they always scour and scourge to have you believe that there's something better than they are. Patty Hadu is a dirt bag, like the lowest rung on the ladder. Straight up liar with so many pairs of expensive glasses. Like, not jealous of your expensive glasses. I just hate that you lie to my Canadian patriot people. Like, she's gonna continue to do it. Like, I saw Jenica Atwin in the side. She's gonna be lying soon.
My riding quite a bit, actually, to, in particular, many chiefs in my riding. Chief Mushquash, Chief Mashano, many chiefs have given me great advice about how to hold this very colonial portfolio with the utmost respect for First Nations. And so I'm very grateful to their advice.
Excellent, thank you. You mentioned the criteria for being listed on the Indigenous Business Directory. Can you speak to some of the checks and balances that exist to ensure that process has integrity?
Absolutely, and I have a whole list here of on things or 0.7.
What kept not
it did to look. You could share a timeline moving forward of how this process is going to actually unfold and how long are we going to have to wait. I'd like to turn to Jessica to talk about the consultations that have been underway and maybe a little bit about the timeline as well.
Thank you for the question. Since 2021, there's been work undertaken by something called the Transformative Indigenous Procurement Strategy, which is set to wrap up in 25-26. There's been extensive consultations both with Indigenous economic development organizations as well as directly with Indigenous businesses and communities. We're taking the feedback directly from those engagements to formulate next steps and move forward in the timeline. So we're looking specifically at the transfer of the validation and verification function of businesses, changes to the existing procurement strategy for Indigenous business that are designed to address the opportunities that exist for continuous improvement.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So I'm just wondering, at what point does the government get out of the business completely so that it's run by Indigenous led? I mean, this is what you're talking about. And I just want to say that, it is not owned by First Nations people, for sure, identity. I mean, I have status children. Their children will have a lesser status because I'm not Indigenous. That's how it works. So that means that you can eventually get to a generation where you don't have status. So to me, this is the problem. The problem is that the government's involved. So you're talking about getting out? When?
I think Jessica was clear that the goal is that we would be able to have something in place by 2025, and I would say that sooner if possible. And I'm in conversations with the partners themselves, who all agree that as soon as possible they would like to manage lists, but they also all agree that they don't want a dilution of procurement from Indigenous businesses, and so that's the balance we're trying to reach.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barrett for 5, please.
Minister, today Canada's first Indigenous Justice Minister and Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who, as you know, was fired from Cabinet by Mr. Trudeau for speaking out against and trying to stop his attempted obstruction of justice. She issued a statement online, and it said, "A Prime Minister committed to true reconciliation would have removed Randy and the other Randy from Cabinet long ago. Instead, we get to watch white people play Ancestry Wheel of Fortune. So shameful and extremely destructive." Do you agree with that characterization?
What I would say is that Indigenous identity is any use of Indigenous identity in a fraudulent way undermines Indigenous people.
Okay, so we have a member of your cabinet, a member of your caucus, who a 50% owner of a company that claimed to be wholly Indigenous owned, applied for government contracts under that false pretense. To dispense with the pleasantries, Randy Boissonnault lied about who he is in order to profit, and in doing so, attempted to disenfranchise legitimate and actual Indigenous-owned businesses. Do you think that that is appropriate? And if you don't think it's appropriate, do you think that he should remain in Cabinet?
What I would say is that GHI, the company in question, was never on the Indigenous Business Directory.
Right, and so they applied.
I cannot, for example, weigh in on what decision points were made when GHI was awarded contracts. And so I can tell you, though, with very high degree of confidence that he was not on the list.
He wasn't
defined indigeneity.
So he wasn't on the list. We know that he has previously said that he was Indigenous. He is now saying that he is not. So we know that he applied for a contract saying he was Indigenous. And this is the point that Ms. Wilson-Raybould has made. And it certainly undermines reconciliation. Would you agree that a cabinet minister claiming indigeneity to win government contracts and remaining in cabinet undermines the government's stated goal of reconciliation?
Well, I think Mr. Boissonnault's statement is on record, but what I can say is what I've just said, which is I think that when people...
It's such a clear and defining statement. I think that Randy Boissonnault's statement is on record and then has nothing to say about it. Patty Hadu, you're being exposed right now. I know you'll never see this video because junkies like you don't watch. They're the things that other people are saying about them that are negative. That's why you don't grow as a person. Look at this sad frump. Look at her. Just disgusting.
Utilize false claims of indigeneity. It's extremely harmful to Indigenous people, and it's extremely harmful to the process of reconciliation.
So thank you for that. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, said this morning, "I'm happy that he, Randy Boissonnault, is continuing to lead on issues around jobs and employment and represent Alberta in our government." So you agree that it's harmful. The Prime Minister doesn't. So do you agree or do you disagree with the Prime Minister with his delight that Mr. Boissonnault, who is a fraudster, is continuing to represent Alberta in the Government of Canada, in your cabinet, all the while attempting to disenfranchise Indigenous individuals and Indigenous-owned businesses.
Well, I think what is important here is that it's not up to me or any other person to police people's indigeneity. And so
what I think is wise is that it's not up to me. She just said that. Like, again, I don't cut these things up into little clips, but I could. Like, what I don't think is wise is to listen to a person like me.
For
Well,
me,
he
this
said,
isn't
he's,
about.
Minister,
This isn't about.
Minister, he said it's not for you to police. He said he lied. So he's the one who said he lied. You know that he lied, and you just need to have the moral clarity to say that what he did was wrong. It undermines reconciliation, and that type of fraud is unacceptable in your government. The rest of my time to Mr. Genis. Are there any instances of companies facing consequences for Indigenous identity fraud that you can identify?
I don't think I can answer that question.
Okay, I'll go to something else, but if you could provide us with a list afterwards of any instances of companies that have been faced consequences for Indigenous identity fraud and what those consequences would be. It's been reported that Randy Boissonneau's claims that his great-grandmother was Cree, that those claims were false. Those were claims that he personally made in the House of Commons. They have now been revealed to be false. Do you have any comment on that?
My comment stands. The issue of indigeneity, is not for me to determine who is Indigenous, but that in general, claims of indigeneity
Chair, and
that are
just
false
in
are
the
very
seconds I
harmful to
have
Indigenous
left,
peoples.
the minister in the last round referenced the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance as being able to answer certain questions that she has not able to answer. I wonder if there'd be agreement for us to hear from the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance at some point to help shed some further light on these things.
That is your time.
Thank you.
And we'll finish up with Mr. Batiste. Go ahead, please, for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm finding the whole conservative narrative a little bit problematic. Member
From by the
Thank you for nothing.
First Nations peoples, so that we.
Baptism is useless.
Yours for 5 minutes, at which point we will go into our line of questioning. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for inviting me and my colleagues.
Again, we're going to skip over the witness introductions, but here you'll see in this committee what I found, like just from the little bit that I got to see of this one, that Ben Carr, who is the chair of the committee, isn't feeling the Liberal caucus anymore. I don't think he's drinking the Kool-Aid. Like, you tell me when you watch this, show me, again, I'm not sticking up for some Liberal, but like, they're allowed to change, right? They can see the error of their ways and try to, they won't cross the floor, but it does seem like Ben Carr, the chair of this committee, who I do not like, but he seems to be getting, or some of the messages getting through to him. Like, maybe it's a survival tactic. I don't know. Watch. This
yours for 5 minutes, at which point we will go into our line of questioning. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for inviting me and my colleagues to appear before you again regarding the question of privilege related to cyber attacks targeting members of Parliament. Members will recall that we had previously appeared on June 4th of this year. We trust that our testimony will assist the committee in its study. Depuis que PROC a ordonné la production de documents de l'administration de la Chambre et des institutions gouvernementales.
And we're sure that
relevant. Could you confirm some question, Mr. Chair, since we are on the subject of a question of privilege and we have the law clerk, Mr. Bedard, before us, I want to ask Mr. Bedard some questions.
Again, pay attention here, guys. Like, is Ben Carr changing sides? Like, he seems very in the way of the Liberals, and we don't see that in committee ever. Like, sometimes we see an honorable minister, but he seems like he's kind of bent on hanging up, extra chromosome Turnbull. Like, and again, I love those people with extras. Turnbull gives them a bad name. You know who I'm talking about.
Regarding the letter that he submitted to the Speaker yesterday relating to the question of privilege that has seized the House of Commons. Yesterday, the Government House Leader, Karina Gould, stated on CBC that the government has complied with the House order to turn over documents related to the Green Slush Fund. Could you confirm that pursuant to the House order, the government is required to turn over all documents related to the Green Slush Fund on an unredacted basis?
Thank you for the point of order.
Yeah, Ms. Matheson on a point of order.
I would just like to call in relevance on that question, sir.
During that introduction from Mr. Cooper, I would agree. I'm not sure that it's relevant to the cyber attack. Mr. Cooper, I've stopped the clock. I'm going to give you, before we turn the floor to Mr. Bedard, an opportunity to maybe just explain where you see the relevance between, just one moment, just between what we've asked the House administration to be here today on and this, and then I can help inform a decision. So if you can just clarify, and that will help us dictate where we go from here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is relevant insofar as this is a matter dealing with a question of privilege. We have a question of privilege that is seized, the House is seized with. The law clerk is here before us. He sent a letter yesterday to the Speaker relating to that question of privilege. The Government House Leader has made certain representations, and I wish to pose questions related to whether the government has complied with its requirement to turn over documents to the law clerk pursuant to the House order. We also have, and how it also ties in to this question of privilege, is that we have documents that the government has withheld from this committee related to this question of privilege. So it's part of a pattern of obstruction and non-disclosure by this government.
Okay. On the point of order, Mr. Turnbull.
By that argument, anything referring to a question of privilege would be relevant to this committee proceeding today, and that's not the case. Obviously, this is about a particular issue that witnesses have been called here to answer to the committee members' questions, and I think we should stay focused on what is relevant to this committee, which is in the notice of meeting. If we need to maybe read that back to Mr. Cooper, I'm sure he can read himself, I assume.
Okay, I've got Mr. Duncan and then Mr. Garrettson on the same point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the point is where what Mr. Cooper laid out is this is about the government's record and the seriousness in which they take questions of privilege, and in the case here of document production. So yes, sadly, there are many questions of privilege being dealt with. Our committee deals with them and is primarily tasked with dealing with them. But in terms of the relevance, it's absolutely relevant when we look at other document production requests that the government has, and Mr. Cooper laid out, the government incorrectly asserting yesterday that they are providing all the documentation on a question of privilege when they're not. So it is absolutely relevant to this of showing and demonstrating that the government is not taking document production seriously, including in this question here before us, and another one that's ongoing right now. So I think it's absolutely relevant to get the scope and a confirmation from the law clerk who's here about whether the government on other questions of privilege, other requests for document production is meeting that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Mr. Garrettson.
Well, notwithstanding the fact that I would love to engage in this discussion with Mr. Cooper, because I would love to read out about how Larry Brock, a Conservative member, has made comments to the effect of, if you want to get a document, you go to court and ask for warrants for production of works, of documents. I'd love to get into that discussion too, and notwithstanding that, perhaps Mr. Cooper and I will have another opportunity to debate that at another time, but I would completely concur with the comments from Mr. Turnbull and to be fair, your initial assessment of this, Mr. Chair, of trying to find where the relevance is here. The only thing both Mr. Cooper and Mr. Duncan have been able to offer is that, well, they both have to do with questions of privilege. And to Mr. Turnbull's point and to your initial assessment of this, that is not displaying. They have not in any way whatsoever shown you what you asked for, which is to demonstrate where the relevance is.
Okay, thank you very much, folks, for your contribution. So, colleagues, this is what I'm going to do. Mr. Bedard, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond as you see fit to the discussion that we've been having briefly. Mr. Cooper, I'm going to ask, when the clock has been stopped, when the floor returns to you, that we look at bringing our line of questioning back into what we've invited our witnesses to have here today. So let's just provide the opportunity.
Point of order.
Yeah, Mr.
Are
Garrison.
you extending this opportunity to everybody then? So when it's my turn, will I be able to ask a completely irrelevant question, but then the follow-up questions will have to be relevant? I just want to know so that I'm well prepared.
I may reject the premise of that, Mr. Garrison, but my rulings will be consistent. So I am going to afford Mr. Bedard just an opportunity to respond. Let's see where we can get here. But Mr. Cooper, if following that response, we can try to bring us back to specifically the question of cyber attacks. I think that would be in all of our best interests. Mr. Bedard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As regards the comparison between the current study and the question of privilege that is currently debated in the House, I will note a few things. First of all, for the current study, this committee has received an order of reference from the House. So the motion, the privilege motion, has been passed, and this committee has been entrusted with the study. Secondly, the motion that the committee itself has adopted in May 2024 contemplated that government entities could make redactions. So the documents that were provided by the House, by other government entities, they included redactions, and at the House we were very mindful when we made the redactions of the fact that these had been authorized and actually asked by the committee. Now, if we go to the question of privilege that is currently before the House and my letter of yesterday to the Speaker, which was tabled in the House on the same day, it's in line with the other letter that I provided to the Speaker. Documents have been ordered by the House on June 10. The order from the House did not contemplate any redaction. Some documents were withheld or contained redactions. In relation to previous letters, with that information before the House, a question privilege was raised, and the Speaker ruled that it constituted prima facie question privilege and allowed the appropriate motion to be moved that the matter be referred to this committee. I'll note that the Speaker also
Bedard, just on the matter of the documents that have been recently presented or produced and filed with you from ISED, from the National Research Council, and from Statistics Canada, those documents contain redactions and some have been withheld from you, correct? Relating to the Green Slush Fund. Okay. And so what you're confirming is that neither the House of Commons or the RCMP have all of the documents due to the government blacking out certain documents and withholding others, correct?
Excuse me, could you repeat this question, the last question?
Well, you're just confirming that you don't have all the documents, correct?
Based on the information I received from the government entities themselves, they put in their letter that some documents were withheld, and also just on the face of the documents, there are some redactions. So
that's right, and thank you for that. And I would note that Karina Gould yesterday on CBC asserted that all documents have been produced related to the Green Slush Fund. The government has turned over all documents. Let the record show that Karina Gould lied about
yeah, Mr. Turnbull, the floor is yours on a point of order.
I have to bring up relevance here because Mr. Cooper is referring to something else that is being currently debated in the House that I would note is being filibustered by the Conservatives for over 23 days now. because they don't want that to actually be referred to this committee. But more importantly, this meeting is about a question of privilege related to cyber attacks targeting members of Parliament, which I thought was a serious issue that the Conservatives cared about. Obviously, Mr. Cooper has no questions with regard to this question of privilege, the one that this committee is supposed to be studying today. So I wonder if we can move on from his political attacks that are clearly not in line with what we're supposed to be talking about today.
Point of order.
Yes.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. I have 2 points of order. First, Mr. Gerritsen, and then Ms. Gaudreau, and then I have something to say. Mr. Gerritsen.
Had not just an initial response from Mr. Bedard, but we've also had an exchange, and more went back and forth. So the door is swung wide open right now in terms of not having to be relevant. I would just like a ruling from you, Mr. Chair, as to whether or not you're shutting that door and you're going to force everyone to be relevant from this point, or whether we're going to continue on down this same path of entertaining, possibly entertaining in order to determine where to go. I think it's fair to everybody who needs to ask questions after this point, because I will completely change my questions if you're going to permit that kind of behavior for the rest of the meeting.
I appreciate your feedback, Mr. Gerritsen. Colleagues, what I was seeking, and Madame Gaudreau, I know that I have to come to you in a moment. Colleagues, what I was seeking was a compromise to help us start the meeting off in a place that could create some efficiency. I share the view raised by Mr. Turnbull and Mr. Gerritsen and previously by Ms. Matheson that at this point I'm seeing a divergence from relevance. Mr. Cooper does have a little bit of time remaining, so Mr. Cooper, when the floor does get returned to you, my hope is that you are going to bring us back to APT 31, or I will interject at that point because I do believe that we're veering a little bit too far off course. Madame Gaudreau, à vous.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
21 consequent
from series of bulletin that started in January.
It relates specifically to the progressive reconnaissance attack from January of 2021.
It is a follow-up of the bulletins that were issued, a series of bulletins that were issued in January 2021.
About 20 seconds here, Mr. Cooper.
Okay, thank you. It was represented in evidence that the attack was stopped in January of 2021. Can you confirm that that was the case, that there wasn't a subsequent attack from ATP 31 in 2022 or at any other later point in time beyond January of 2021?
I can confirm that the date range that were in the initial bulletin were wrong, and we confirm that these were related to the 2021 attack. So confirmed by our partners that the date range should have indicated in the bulletin that it was the 2021 attack.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Cooper. Madame Fortier, 6 minutes à vous.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. I find it very surprising that today we're trying to change the subject when we are seized of a subject which was requested by the opposition. They wanted, the nature of partners mentioned above months, and I congratulate Mona, who stole all my questions, but I'll continue.
To what
Beauty abounds in Guysborough, Nova Scotia. You should check it out. Come and visit.
Oh, yeah.
I think our leader, Trudeau, I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word.
Oh, hello. Do you have a warrant to be here? Oh, yeah.
It's time for a change in this country, my friends. A real change.
Wiggle and squirm as you might, it is really hard to put lipstick on a pig.
When I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises.
WTF.
Here.
I know this place is where I am. No other place is better than. No matter where I go, I am proud to be Canadian. I am, you know I am. The world that works. The one we call Canadian.
Gentlemen, beam me aboard.
The 20% of people that maybe would still consider voting Liberal do not follow politics, which is a part of the Liberal playbook. Like, be as disgusting as you can so that people don't watch. The cognitive dissonance, the hypocrisy in the Liberal Party is palpable, man. They clear out a room. No one even knows what to say back to the lies and truths that they're telling. Every single Liberal that I watch seems worse than the last one until the next one. Got a big issue with Anita Vanderbilt today.
Shame on you. I'm done. This is about protecting women. Can't do this anymore. No wonder nothing gets done in this country. Over our bodies. Shame on you.
And I want to state from a survivor's perspective, Trudeau doesn't care, Ford doesn't care, Arif doesn't care, and the government doesn't care.
Leader of the opposition has asked Conservative chaired committees to hold as many meetings as possible during the summer to take us away from the important work that we're doing listening to our constituents. And we also know that in this case, it was a few days' notice. We were not given, any of the members except Conservatives, the opportunity to put forth witness names.
Megan Walker, a longtime advocate for women, says she's never seen anything like this, and if Liberals wanted to pick their own witnesses, they could vote for more meetings instead of derailing this one. She was especially critical of Vandenbeld.
She has betrayed women and girls across this country who are hopeful that one day there will be change. One day they will not have to walk through their communities in fear. One day they will be considered to be human beings instead of objects.
Kate Alexander was to testify 3 years to the day after she was brutally assaulted by an ex-partner, suffering wounds so severe she feared she wouldn't survive. The charges against him were stayed due to the time it took to go to trial.
I said in my testimony, this government doesn't care, and she literally proved my point.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
Oh, yeah.
Hey gang, what's up? Aaron right here, Canadian Looney. Shameless bullies. These Liberals are repulsive. In this video, we're going to take a look at the disaster that this worthless tramp, Anita Vanderbilt, is. She's a disgusting human being. I don't mean physically, she is that way too, but it's her way of being, I guess, that is the worst part. She pulls stunts. She obviously hates women. Most women are great. I don't even consider this specimen, this scourge, this bully, this cry wolf, a woman. I don't consider her human. She's something else. She's a Liberal caucus Kool-Aid cult member. Like, you can see, again, another one of these swollen, disgusting life forms taking away the good things we had in Canada and never wants to give them back. It's unforgivable. On a lighter note, we've got Michelle Ferreri, one of our favorite MPs. This is a politician that I do trust. She's a real person. You can see her frustration with the tactics that this cow, Anita Vanderbilt, is presenting. Who in the hell voted for this chick? Like, she has nothing to offer. Obviously, she can't even control her diet. How much Kool-Aid did you drink? What are they putting in that Kool-Aid? Oh, it's a lot to handle.
We'll give the floor to Miss Alexander to start. You have 5 minutes.
Fortunate to be here today. I'm supposed to be dead. On July 31st, 2021, exactly 3 years ago today, I sent the 2-word WhatsApp message, "Please help," to a friend who thankfully believed me. My ex was beating me. All 6'3", approximately 250 pounds of him, because he couldn't find his car keys. For 4 hours, with his fists, his feet, a wooden rolling pin, door wells, he split my head open in 3 places, gouged my eyes out with his thumbs, kicked my ribs, and tortured me in ways I can feel but can't fully describe. I do not know how my body survived it. My ex enjoyed what he did to me. He threatened to kill my family. The police were going to leave me for dead, but my former neighbor intervened. And after all that, guess what your criminal and justice system gave me? A peace bond. All 8 charges, 5 in the provincial and 3 in the federal, were stayed against my ex. And I can't say his name because it will forever be known as alleged abuse. I ask of you exactly what I asked Justice Himmel, who had the tears in her eyes on March 26, 2024, when I received the peace bond. Why does he abuse, and why is he allowed to get away with it? He abuses because he is publicly and personally rewarded for it, and he is allowed to get away with it because you, the government of Canada, lets him. Abuse is a choice, a moral failing, and it is also inexcusable. Even 3 years later, my ex is still abusing me. I am suing him as the only form of legal justice I have left, and he has put in a meritless counterclaim as a continuation of abuse against me. He states I was self-injurious and I stole his Rolex after. He is lying under oath. You will listen to me because I am Caucasian, educated, and a member of an industry which holds space in the public eye. But these issues have been plaguing people everywhere across the nation for so long in the dark corners. But now we are in the light. We will shine until there is retribution. We will break the stigmas down into the nothingness that they are. There are no stereotypical victims. There are only stereotypical abusers. IPV and SA happens in all cultures, all socioeconomic statuses, races, ages, genders, but so predominantly with women and children. Today is not about me. Today is about us and what this means going forward. You have granted me the honor of speaking on behalf of all men, women, non-binary, and children, survivors of violence. And I want to state from a survivor's perspective, Trudeau doesn't care, Ford doesn't care, Arif doesn't care, and the government doesn't care. The government doesn't care about Courtney Goudreau, who faced potential charges and jail time for speaking the name of her convicted abuser when a publication ban was implemented without her consent. The government doesn't care about Brian and Suzanne Sweeney, whose daughter Angie was shot to death along with 3 innocent children. Brett and Jessica Broadfoot, whose daughter was stabbed to death 2 weeks ago at age 17, leaving behind her absolutely incredible 15-year-old brother, Lucas. The government doesn't care about Melanie Hatton, who fled BC to Ontario after nearly being murdered by her ex-partner. She suffers long-term traumatic brain injury and still lives in fear daily with her 2 children, and now owes $300,000 to the CRA because her ex bankrupted her. The government doesn't care about Tanya Couch, who was sexually assaulted by her former commanding officer and cadets, but the military police failed to investigate it properly. The case was finally reopened, leading to 3 sexual assault charges, ultimately being stayed after the defense used Section 278 of the Criminal Code to subpoena 7 years of Tanya's personal counseling records. The government doesn't care about Alexa Barkley, who has suffered multiple SA throughout her life, with only one of her abusers receiving a mere 6 months of house arrest for child sexual assault.
Total number of femicides in Canada between 2019 and 2023 is 840. 840 dead women. The year after year increases significance, yet here we are, and the government hasn't called it a crisis or epidemic. The government, in fact, hasn't addressed it at all. Current government strategies to end femicide, whatever they are not working. If they were, we would see a decrease in femicide rates. I'm hard-pressed to know what those strategies are, or even if there are strategies. Male violence against women and femicide are preventable, and immediate action has to be taken to end this crisis now.
Another one of my favorites here to watch is Michelle Ferreri. She's amazing. Slippery out here, actually. Anyway, Michelle Ferreri is the bomb. Let's take a peek.
To remind all of those in the room, all of the members posing questions, that we are here about intimate partner violence against women, so let's try and keep our focus there. At this point, I would like to welcome Michelle for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Extremely powerful testimony. To call this a crisis is an understatement, and the connection between each of your testimonies is profound. Kate, I know you wanted to finish and say a few more things, but what jumped off the page of me, what you said, above all of the horrific things, calling it alleged, and you have all of those photos of your assault, publicly and personally rewarded for it. Those are your words of your attacker. Can you expand on what you mean by that legally in Canada?
Thank you for the question. Abusers don't think in the same way that the average person does, and which is why they are able to commit the offenses that you or I wouldn't commit. Abusers get off on the reward of being allowed to commit these offenses. I have video taken of my ex and his enjoyment of what he did to me, and knowing that the government said, well, this isn't a big deal. And I will quote the Crown Attorney, we don't have time for this. So he is publicly rewarded because he feels like he is above the law. He is personally rewarded because he is 6'3" and 250 pounds. He can push me around no matter if I had a black belt or otherwise. He has a son who is in his care, and this was overlooked. There is an open case with CPS. Nothing was done. The federal ombudsperson has called on our behalf. Nothing was done. So his rewards are he gets to operate however he chooses to. There are no consequences for his actions, and I guarantee you if he is not stopped, he will be a part of the homicide statistics. He will kill someone. He came damn close to it with me on this day.
The irony of it being on this day, and then your testimony today, and I know you flew a long way to testify here today, and I know your parents are also here, and I think one of the things that we don't address is the impact on families and children as well, and I know Deputy Chief talked about this, and I guess what I'm trying to get at the heart of this in this meeting is what changes do we have to do? And you were poignant in saying you have a Canadian passport, but you don't feel safe in this country. And I guess, you know, we have a letter from the premiers, all premiers across this country, asking for bail reform. And, you know, you're saying you don't feel safe. It's a publication ban without consent. And to Deputy Chief's point, you have a blatant disregard. So you can see the connection between Kate's testimony and the Deputy Chief's testimony. So if I could go to the Deputy Chief and say, what needs to be done federally? And to Ms. Walker's point, if the money was being spent the way that it's saying it's being spent, we wouldn't see an increase. We would see a decrease. And yet we have the worst numbers we've ever seen. So if I could get the Deputy Chief on record saying what needs to be done, do you agree with this bail reform letter that the premiers have signed? And how much of this can be reversed in policy federally?
Let me first say, really appreciate the question, and I really want
to. Beauty abounds in Guysborough, Nova Scotia. You should check it out. Come and visit.
Oh, yeah. I think our leader, Trudeau, I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word.
Oh, hello. Do you have a warrant to be here?
Oh, yeah. It's time for a change in this country, my friends. A real change.
Wiggle and squirm as you might, it is really hard to put lipstick on a pig.
When I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises.
WTF.
Here.
I know this place is where I am. No other place is better than. No matter where I go, I am proud to be Canadian. I am, you know I am. The wild step work.
The one we call Canadian. Gentlemen, beam me aboard.
Honourable member from Leeds.